Welcome, everyone.
To be a public speaker, you know.
It's a treat to have you all here today. We're all eating, and it's okay to keep eating as we talk. Keith isn't going to eat. He'll eat afterwards. We want to welcome here to the law school Peter Neufeld, co-director of the Innocence Project, my first boss as a lawyer, and an old friend, Keith Harward, exonerated in a case in Virginia. He didn't realize I'd moved here. I'd been teaching at another law school 8 months ago and before that, and I came across his case when I was reading through dusty files, working on an article with Peter Neufeld that came out of a presentation we gave to the National Academy of Sciences. We have a conference during the day where we're having research meetings talking about this. It's been 10 years since this momentous scientific report came out on forensic science. And we're having research meetings during the day talking about crime labs, blind testing, lab reports, litigation efforts. But we're here today, here at lunch, to talk about the human consequences of forensics gone wrong. And there's nothing formal that's going to happen. Peter and Keith are going to talk. They're going to have a Q&A and talk to each other, talk to you, and think of what questions you'd like to ask them as well. We'll stop in maybe 25 minutes, half an hour, and take questions from everyone. So thank you all so much. Thank you for being here. This is a really special event. One last thing, it's made possible by CSAFE, which is a center for the application of statistics to forensics, which is in turn supported by NIST, a federal agency, the National Institute of Standard Technology. They've been funding courses and research at a number of universities, now at Duke, and they've sponsored the events today. So has the Innocence Project, that Peter Neufeld co-directs, and Chris Fabricant and others from the Innocence Project are here as well. So we want to thank all of them for making this event possible. So.
Thanks. What we're going to do is a little bit different. I'm going to spend about 3 minutes sort of summarizing the case, because really what I want to discuss with Keith is not so much the law and the facts, but rather the human cost, the human experience, because I think that's a lot more interesting. The rest of us can sort of watch the reality TV show of the case. But what you really need to know here, and I will be very brief, is that back in 1982, Keith was in the U.S. Navy. He was stationed on the USS Carl Vinson, big aircraft carrier. They're at Newport News, Virginia, and one night, while the ship is at the shipyard, a couple of blocks from there, a couple lived. A man broke into their house, a white man wearing a Navy uniform, and took a crowbar to the husband and beat him to death, which woke up the wife. And then the assailant began to sexually assault her repeatedly. He put a diaper over her head at some point so she couldn't get a good view of him. During the course of the encounter, he also bit her repeatedly on her thighs. And unlike a lot of other bite mark cases, there's no question she was bitten repeatedly. It was a gruesome, horrible crime that this assailant had committed. And at first, they had no leads. We'll talk about some of the investigation in a minute. About 6 months later, Keith is arrested, a very minor incident involving a girlfriend, where it was alleged that during their little fight that he had bit her on her hand. That case was ultimately dismissed, but the detective who was working the big murder case was there in court, heard about this incident of a sailor and a bite, and eventually brought the victim into court to see if she could identify Keith. She could not, but nevertheless, they used hypnosis on the guy who was a security guard at the base, who said that months ago he now remembered that the person he identified as Keith came back to the base that night, back to the ship, and there was some blood on his uniform. All she remembered was a white guy with a Navy shirt with the logo of the Carl Vinson on the shirt and some indication of his rank. But based on the fact that he had been in an incident, the bite marks which were photographed were then shown to different experts. and two of the leading dental experts in the country, one who worked with Virginia Forensics, another one who was one of the founders of the Forensic Dentistry Organization, and a founder, and not a founder, but a president of the American Academy of Forensic Science. Both said that the bite marks were made by Keith, and they were sure of it. The defense hired their own experts. Their experts said, oh, no, we couldn't disagree with the prosecution experts, and said that it matched him. In all, there were 6 different forensic dentists who said that the bite marks belonged to Keith. On that evidence, he was convicted. Fortunately, he didn't get the death penalty. We'll talk about that. And ultimately, he spent 34 years, 33 years in prison until lawyers, Chris Fabricant, who's here from the Innocence Project, and his team did DNA testing on the vaginal swabs from the rape kit, on the semen, on the diaper that the perpetrator used to wipe himself off after he had had intercourse with the victim, and it came back as a single male profile. Keith was excluded, and it was a hit to another sailor, another white sailor, who was also on the call, Vincent, at that time, who didn't know this couple, who had gone on to commit other acts of violence, had been sent to prison in Ohio, and actually, when he was identified, had already died while in prison, so could not be prosecuted for the crime. Keith, in April of 2016, was finally exonerated, let out of prison, and everybody acknowledged his innocence. The only, we're supposed to talk about statistics and forensics. I think the only interesting sort of statistics issue, and the statisticians in the room are going to probably jump all over me, but I'm thinking of, so what is the likelihood that one expert forensic dentist would erroneously match Keith to the bites on the body, and then you come up with something, and then you say, what's the likelihood that 2 forensic dentists independently and innocently would both erroneously get that result? And then you ask the question about 3, what's likely? And then finally you get to the question, what is the likelihood that 6 independent forensic dentists would all on their own innocently, erroneously match Keith to these bite marks that came, in fact, as we now know, to a scientific certainty from this other gentleman. So now that I've asked that question, we can go on and have the interview. Okay? You don't have to answer it. So Keith, why don't you tell folks a little bit about what your life was like before this arrest?
Before the arrest, I wasn't a very good person, but I did not do this crime. I wasn't that far out, but I was a 20-some year old. I was convicted when I was 26, got out when I was 60. I wasn't a perfect person. I was involved with a little bit of drugs, a little bit of alcohol, and was a knucklehead. I was in the Navy, just biding my time, doing like a lot of people at that time were doing, or some were doing. But I wasn't an angel by any means, but I wasn't this. And I knew it, my family knew it, others knew it. Apparently the criminal system in Newport News didn't know it because they convicted me of this crime. It's pretty sad, the situation that the system itself went through to convict me. But, when you come down to it, a prosecutor, to be a prosecutor, has to prosecute. So that's how I ended up in the ringer I did. But I was just going along doing day-to-day things, just like a lot of people did.
Well, Keith, you were in the Navy at that time. Did you, none of us were necessarily so good in that era,
Right.
myself included, but I had dreams, I had desires.
Right.
Did you have any plans when you were 26 about what you wanted to do in life once you got out of the Navy?
Well, yes, I wanted to start my own business and do that type of thing, start a family. I was going to live with my parents up in Virginia, up in the Blue Ridge Mountains. That's where I was going to end up at, and take care of them because I was the baby. I'm the youngest of the 4 sons that they had, and I already knew that was gonna be my job, to take care of my parents in their older days and live and work around that area. It's a beautiful part of the country.
Did you have an idea of what kind of business you would start?
Well, I was going to get into something mechanical of some means, probably like a small engine lawnmowers, chainsaws, things like that. I did a lot of that when I was in school. I did a lot of that before I was in school when I was young. I like to take things apart because I figured if a human being put them together, I might be able to take them apart and put them together. And a lot of times I did take them apart, and sometimes I did put them back together where it worked successfully. But that's what was my plan. I wanted to work with my hands and do mechanical stuff and things like that, which I still do today. I do a lot of that type thing.
So, Keith, I'm not talking about when you were arrested, but did there come a time when you first sort of learned that there'd been a murder and a horrible crime committed near the base?
I was not aware of it. I didn't know that the crime was committed when we went through the gauntlet on the ship of the
So
odontologist.
why don't you explain the gauntlet and how many people were involved in it and what actually happened?
Well, what they did was Newport News Police Department hired a couple of dentists to come on board the Carl Vinson. The Carl Vinson is an aircraft carrier, still around after all these years. It was brand new then. I was on it while it was being built in Newport News. But they brought these dentists on to the mess decks, the chow hall, the dinner, not this type of situation, but where we ate. And they just brought everybody on the ship and lined them up. And we walked down through there, and you open your mouth up and did like that. And they took fast lights and that type of thing, and they just sent you on. And if they were looking for a particular tooth, a rotated something or another, and when they found those people, that's the people that they started looking at to see, okay, well, because the odontologist and dentist said, well, this tooth being at this certain angle would leave a fingerprint type situation. I went through that twice. The first time I was sent on my way. And the second time, there were some questions, but I was again, they eliminated me. Said, no, this is not him. After they looked a little closer, said, it was not him. And I was gone, like a lot of them. And there were probably 3,000 people that, or guys and girls, but mostly guys, that they went through because they were looking for a white male. So running through that gauntlet is what they did. They looked in our mouths to see if we had that certain tooth that was askew to be able to try to match it.
So, Chris, I may be mistaken, but I think it's probably the largest identification procedure in the history of the country.
You know, this would also enrage some statisticians in the room, but probably.
Yeah.
See, an aircraft carrier, when the air wing is on board, is 6,000. It's a small city. At that time, there was probably somewhere around 3,000 because the ship was being built. People were coming in and going off, temporary duty, that type of thing. But there were probably at least 3,000.
Do you know how many people of that 3,000 or 6,000 people that were examined initially made it into that second group?
I do not know. That I do not know.
Okay.
Sorry.
So, at the end of that, they excluded you. You have no interest to anybody.
Right.
And then, all of a sudden, there came a time when you were in court because of that matter with your girlfriend, which was dismissed. Did the detective who was working in the homicide introduce himself to you at that time?
After the case was thrown out, he and another detective came up and said, well, we lost your moles or whatever. We need to get some more moles of your teeth. Would you come down to a local dentist office and have moles made? And because I didn't do the crime, I could care less. Sure, I'll go down there and do what you got to do, if it would help you out, being the kind of person I am. But, I didn't do the crime. So all through the trials and everything, I really didn't care because I didn't do it. I mean, if somebody accuses you of something, it might change a little bit. But if you know you weren't involved, you're not going to spend a lot of time involved with it. But I did what they wanted me to do, went down and they took moles. That was the same day we left the courtroom and went right down there to it. So they had all this set up because they brought Miss Perone in, who was the victim in it, and had her sitting in the back of the courtroom. And in my opinion, they were going, is that him? Is that him? But that's just only my opinion, but that's how I felt. And she couldn't identify me. even after all the other stuff that went on before that, as far as trying to identify me. After the fight happened with my girlfriend, from that point to the trial, apparently I was the number one suspect. I was the guy, so they started building the case around me.
I mean, just to appreciate, so, which is very unusual, okay, despite the incredibly suggestive identification proceeding in court, this woman had the wherewithal to say, I can't identify him as the perpetrator. The actual attack lasted several hours, and her eyes were only covered for a portion of that time. There were lights on, okay, in different parts of the home, but she doesn't make an identification. And despite that, simply because of the event that he was involved in with his girlfriend, he became the primary suspect. How long was it after you went down and did the dental mold that they arrested you?
It was only a couple weeks. It was not very long. It was not very long when they came up to Willis, Virginia, and arrested me at 9 o'clock at night. They brought, there was sheriff, highway patrol, ambulance, all kind of stuff that they brought up there. My parents' driveway at that time was in the woods. It was a little small farm. So the two detectives came up, but everybody else stayed down. And once they had the handcuffs on me, then they brought this whole flotilla of law enforcement up to the house because I guess they needed backup or something. I'm not sure. But you were talking about Miss Perone not identifying me. You know, she was hypnotized twice also. He couldn't identify me. Even though the shipyard guard, when he first was talking to the police, the timeline and everything else was way over here. And then he was hypnotized and it was me, you know, which, you know, hypnotism in itself, you think, but it happens. It happens.
In fact, when you first went, by the way, what was your thought that night when they came to your house and arrested you for this crime that you knew you had nothing to do with?
It was just overwhelming. It was surreal. You know, all I can say is how I acted. And once again, I thought, okay, I worried about my parents more than anything else. My mother broke down. It was a good thing that they did bring the ambulance because they gave her some sedatives and stuff because it just destroyed her. And that's what I was concerned with the most was the fact that it was so upsetting to my parents because they were in their 60s at the time. And
That's young, by the way.
well, I understand. I'm 62, I think. I'll be 63 this month, matter of fact. But it was so devastating to them, and it was all surreal to me. They took me to to the local courthouse, the county seat of Floyd. They didn't want to keep me because apparently they came all the way from Newport News to get this criminal. They weren't going to keep me. They don't want to be responsible. And that's when they first started interrogating me and tell me, we got eyewitnesses, we got fingerprints, people going to say you were there, we got people, you know, they try to force you, and I didn't know until just recently, they can say anything they want to, and you can't hold them, their feet to the fire whatsoever. And they were saying they had all this evidence against me, and they really didn't, other than the manufactured evidence they had.
So did they actually make up additional evidence and claim they had it on you?
Well, they'd say they had fingerprints. I mean, that's the thing I remember. They said, well, we got fingerprints. And that was one of the strange things about this case. With the time that the perpetrator was there, Mr. Crotty, for the many hours he was there raping, smoking cigarettes, drinking sodas with Miss Perone, there were no fingerprints. They could not find any fingerprints. So when they said fingerprints, I mean, later, because at the time, I wasn't even paying attention because I didn't do the crime, so I didn't know what was going on. But when they told me, you know, we got fingerprints, we got eyewitnesses, we got this, we got that, I said, you're effing crazy. You know, it wasn't me. You know, I don't know how you got this stuff, but you're wrong.
So despite your denials, did they interrogate you again, too?
Well, I mean, once I got back to Newport News, they kept me because it was so late. They took me to Radford, Virginia. I think there's a college there, and kept me there overnight, and then took me back to Newport News. And the day after that, that's when they took me in the room and started asking me questions and that type of stuff. And I said, "You're crazy. I don't know what you're talking about." I got, I didn't give them anything that they could go on or continue to question me on. It was over pretty quick. They were getting nowhere. I wasn't going to confess like a lot of people end up doing because of stress and strain and that type of thing. The confessions that people make because the bright lights on you and you hadn't eaten for 15 hours and that type of thing. I stood by my guns because it was the truth. When you stick with the truth, you can't go wrong.
So eventually you were represented by a lawyer, obviously.
2 lawyers because it was a death penalty case.
Okay,
So
and
the state of Virginia.
did you have a lawyer assigned, or did your family hire a lawyer?
No, it was court-appointed attorneys.
2 lawyers.
2 lawyers, because the death penalty case in Virginia, they give you 2 lawyers, court-appointed attorneys.
And how long from the time you were arrested was it that you went to trial?
Just a few months. I was convicted within 11 months, I think it was. It was less than a year I was convicted. And I spent several months in jail waiting to go into the system, which is the state system, from the city jail.
How were your lawyers?
Oh, they were great people. They were just overwhelmed. They did what they could. They've never dealt with a death penalty case or anything like that.
What did they do?
They did as much as they could.
Which is?
Well, they asked all the pertinent questions of me. They checked all the evidence that was given to them. They would come meet me every couple of days, and we would talk and discuss the case, and they would update me. Well, we're going to talk to this person. We're going to talk to that person. We have this evidence. What do you think about that? We've got this testimony from this person. An eyewitness and things like that. So they went all over the stuff.
Were they ever told that the security guard at the base had been hypnotized?
No.
That wasn't disclosed?
Y'all found that out. That's the first time that I knew about it and anybody else knew about it.
So the 2 pieces of evidence are the security guard and the bite marks, basically, right?
Right. That was pretty much it. I even had an alibi from that night. I was in Norfolk. But they said, well, you could have traveled back. They always find a way. They'll take that square peg and file those corners off and put it in that round hole to convict you.
So did your lawyers make an effort to get their own expert dentist who could refute
Yes.
a prosecution?
What
happened?
The odontologist they contacted said, we can't refute this. We're not going to. And this is opinion based by me. Is the fact that it's an all-boys club, these odontologists that testify at bite marks, and they're not gonna go against their own people regardless.
But it wasn't so much that he said, I can't go against my own people. He actually told your lawyers that he agreed with the conclusion.
Right.
That you were the biter.
Right, that he could not say it was not me.
And so therefore the defense didn't call him as a witness.
Right.
Okay. And at the first trial, they wanted to sentence you to death, didn't they?
Right, yeah, the death penalty in Virginia either carries death or life.
Did your lawyers put on a case as to why you shouldn't be executed?
Well, I mean, they called character witnesses and that type thing, my parents and that type thing, but they first came up and said that they didn't offer me a plea bargain, but they said, well, it's our responsibility to try to save your life. Would you like for us to go forth with a plea bargain? I said, no. I said, I'd rather spend the rest of my days in prison or die knowing that I didn't do it and I was telling the truth than to sit in prison for the rest of my life admitting something I didn't do. I was not going to do that.
So you just said that, like, your mom and dad testified during the sentencing phase?
Yes.
Would you tell us what that was about, what that
Well,
was like? Both for them and for you sitting there.
Well, it was, we've never been in courtrooms before, so other than, the little thing I went through, and that wasn't the same type deal. But it destroyed my mother. She was on the stand. She just cried the whole time, begging for her baby's life. I'm the baby, and some of y'all may be parents of children. If you got more than one, the baby is always special. I am. But for her baby to be put to death, and my father was a very stern man from that period of time, and the one and only time I ever saw my father cry was when he begged for my life. to the jury to not have me put to death. He sat there and bawled, and that's the one and only time I ever saw him cry. And it's kind of traumatic. Hope nobody ever has to go through that, but it's something I'll never forget.
So I'm going to go on to the next question before they all see me cry,
Okay.
if you don't mind.
It's okay, crying's good. I've learned to do that.
So the jury decided to spare your life, is that right?
Right.
Was it, do you know what the verdict was on that? How many jurors were in favor of death, or?
I do not remember what the number was. I know after the trial, one of the jurors called Mr. Muroff, the lawyer, one of the lawyers I had, and said that she wanted to vote not guilty, but it was a situation like, we want to get out of here. Let's get this thing over with. And she felt pressured because she didn't think I was guilty. She just felt I wasn't guilty. But it's, you hear about those, 12 angry men thing. One person wants to hold out, and of course, a jury, your peers, they didn't want to sit there for days and days and days with this trial, and she gave in, but she did. She called my lawyer right after the trial and says, I'm sorry, I didn't feel he was guilty, but I felt I was pressured. I had to do it,
How did you feel as an innocent man, being convicted by this jury of 12 civilians?
Well, it's overwhelming. It wasn't just the jury. It was the state of Virginia.
Was it expected by you? Were you surprised at the outcome?
Well, the attorneys told me that it's not looking good because they have these odontologists, and I witnessed the effects of expert witnesses because in this country you're innocent until proven guilty. But let me tell you, that is not true. You are guilty until proven innocent. I can take any one of you into a courtroom, act as a prosecutor, and say, this person is charged with this crime. The jury is going to think, well, you're guilty because the detectives, the prosecutor, the investigative staff, and the judge is not going to allow an innocent person to be tried. So if they're in this courtroom, something's up. Somebody's guilty of something. In this case, it was them being criminals and not me. They were done, especially when Mr. Levine got done with his credentials.
He's referring to Dr. Lo Levine, who was a dentist from New York State, who actually was employed by the New York State Police, still is. And he was the one who was one of the founders of the Board of Odontology, and he was the past president of the American Academy of Forensic Science. Carried a lot of weight. Another person, actually, who the defense tried to get as an expert was another founder of the organization, and he was the one who said that, no, I agree with Dr. Levine's conclusions. So just to speed this up a little bit, so a few years later, the Virginia Supreme Court reversed the conviction for some legal problems involving the charge and being a capital case. And so you got a second chance, second trial, right?
Right. And I was charged with, this time, first-degree murder instead of capital murder.
And were you again offered a plea?
No. I was not offered a plea. It was the first trial all over again. It's just that the title was not capital, it was first degree. It was the same witnesses.
Did you have the same lawyers or new lawyers?
Oh, I had one lawyer in this case because it wasn't a capital case. Again, a court appointed.
But different than the lawyers you had in the first trial?
Right.
And did this lawyer, the second lawyer, try and go out and hire another expert?
I'm not sure exactly what went on in that second trial because I do not remember most of that trial because I was already believing that, when you got the city, the county, the state, and people from outside the state saying you did something and convicted you, it's a tough road to hoe to try to get out of it.
So what's that like, sitting in court and not even feeling like you're there and this is all happening?
Well, that's what it was. The same things were happening all over again. And of course, the conclusion was going to be the same. And that's how I felt. I already accepted the fact that I was gonna die in prison. So I decided to take those cards that I was dealt and go forth. I wasn't trying to cause any problems for myself or anybody else. I wasn't, people's come up to me and said, well, I don't believe I believe I would have committed suicide. And I think, no, I wouldn't have done that. They would have said, see, we told you so. See, he couldn't live with himself because he was a murderer and a rapist. I wouldn't let him have that. But that never crossed my mind. I said, okay, here's what's in front of me. The smart thing to do is to go forward and try to just live the best I could. And from the first time I was convicted until I stepped out in that parking lot, April 8th of 2016, that's what I felt, even when y'all were involved. Y'all were more excited than I was because I've been there and done that. I was worried about y'all more than I was about me.
So, I mean, you went in, you were arrested, you were, say, 26, 27?
26, yeah.
You came out at what age?
60.
So, I mean, just imagine that, right, for a second. A lot of you young people, you're thinking about your careers, you're thinking about families, you're thinking about lives. And it's from that period, 26, when you graduate from law school, that's how old you were, till you were 60, till your career is gone, till no more family. All those opportunities are gone. Tell us a little bit about, in prison, what happened with your parents while you were in prison?
They both died. They both passed away, so they didn't get an opportunity to see what they knew. They knew, but they didn't get the opportunity, and that's probably the thing I'm the angriest about. Even though I'm not angry, it's the fact that they did not get a chance to see this. That and the fact that some of these SOBs that had me convicted are no longer around anywhere, but their families are. So they get to live with the thought that, oh, my uncle, my brother, my father, whatever, oh, they were criminals. Because I still to this day call those people in Newport News, the detectives, the prosecutor, and the judge, criminals because they broke laws. I didn't, but they did. So their families have to live with that. Skinner, the detective, when I got convicted, I read it in the newspaper when I was in Newport News. He was the detective of the year. He got all kind of awards and things like that. And the wrong people were awarded. I mean, my lawyers should have been, telephone fell, because the attorneys, and I tell them, and I've talked to them, and I've even visited with them and even talked to their church people and stuff, that, this is a check in the win column. Even though it took 33 years, they actually won because they were fighting without the proper tools to fight with. So, that's not good. It's not fair to them.
Keith, did you get to attend the funerals of your parents?
No. They were in North Carolina.
Request?
Yes, but because I was in Virginia, there was no way that they could do it because of the security part of it.
How did you feel about the fact that you couldn't be there?
Well, I mean, it was tough, but I mean, I just had to keep going forward. I had to keep going forward. I felt bad, and I still feel bad about it, but I can't really put it into words. It's kind of difficult to do. It's hard for me to say.
What specifically did you do in prison with your mindset to enable you to just keep on going forward?
Well, survival is one thing.
What do you mean by that?
Well, you're in prison. You're in there with people that aren't right-thinking people. Don't get me wrong. There's some good people in prison that's done bad, but there's some bad people in prison that's done bad, and they deserve to be there. But that is my family. When I got out of prison, I was 7 years in the hole as far as breaking even in life. I had 26 years with my family in this part of freedom. I had 33 years in prison. So those people I was with, those inmates, those convicts, they're my family, and they still are. I talked to one on the phone today. They call me. I stay in touch. They email me. I send sometimes I buy flowers for their families and girlfriends and things like that, because I met some good people in there that they just made some mistakes. And I still feel for them, because I grew up with them. You know, I really grew up with those people, and they deserve, help.
Did you have any health issues while you were in prison?
Later on, toward the end, yes, I had some health issues that resulted from my time in the Navy, but they did the best they could, or they did what they had to take care of me.
Right, but we agree that the best that they could is not necessarily what you got when you came out and you went back to the VA hospital.
Right.
Right.
Well, yes, because people do not want to spend money on convicts, and rightly so, or inmates, or anybody that breaks laws. So there's not a lot of money in the penal system. I mean, that's why you see today, every jail, prison, county lockup, they're all looking for people to work because they don't get paid. And so there's not a lot of money in it. So they had outside companies that did the health care, and of course it's the bottom line. And a lot of guys are suffering even to this day because of these outside companies that handle the medical part of it. But when I was in Sussex and my health issue erupted, I almost died. I ended up in a cardiac unit. They had to stop my heart because I was so full of infection. I was so sick because they couldn't get me, they wouldn't take me to the hospital and that type of thing, that I ended up with afibrillation, and I almost died. I mean, I looked, it's shameful to say, I looked like a Holocaust victim. I mean, I looked terrible.
When you went through that kind of experience with your heart, was there any family or anybody else who could be with you?
No, it's Virginia. My parents are already passed away, and I'm the baby. My three brothers are all older. They have families and responsibilities. And of course, I never asked anybody to come visit or anything like that, because I was the one that was in prison, not them. And I didn't want to punish them for what these other people did.
And in addition to the heart problems, and almost dying at some point, you also had a chronic problem with your GI tract.
Right. Yeah. I had a colostomy, and then when I got out, I had that reversed. I had an ileostomy, and then and had that done. Wake Forest, sorry, the great hospital that they are. Even though they lost yesterday, it was VA sent me through the choice program through Wake Forest, and I had probably one of the best colorectal specialist on the East Coast, and he told me it's like this. He said, "I'm your driver. I'm driving you. I got to get you to where you need to be," and he took great care of me.
Which reminds me of one other thing. When you got out, you had to fight to get your VA benefits back, right?
Correct. Well,
and what was that about?
Well, when I was in the Navy, I broke my thumb, and while I was in prison, I filed for a VA disability. You can't get Social Security, taxes, anything like that. But if you're a veteran, they will give you 10% of what they give you as far as your percentage. If you get 100%, but you're in prison, they only give you 10%. So I was getting 10% when I was in prison. And once I got out, thanks to the Innocence Project, their social worker contacted somebody in Washington and said, "Hey, this guy was behind bars. It wasn't his fault. What can y'all do?" And they gave me a check for $27,000, and I sat in the back of my brother's car and cried, because that's the most money I've ever had in my life, even before.
There came a time when you wrote to the Innocence Project.
Right.
Who else did you write to during those 33 years for help, if anybody?
No one. I didn't know the Innocence Project existed. I had another inmate tell me about the Innocence Project.
So putting the Innocence Project aside, so basically from the time your conviction was affirmed on appeal, you basically gave up trying to reopen the case?
Yes, I stopped. I mean, I've already been convicted in 2 trials. They said I did it. I didn't do it. I said, okay, I'm going to go forward. I'm going to go forward because you get a parking ticket.
Did you bring a...
Try to beat a parking ticket. It was capital murder.
Did you bring a habeas action after your conviction was affirmed?
No.
And in Virginia at the time, and correct me if I'm wrong, Brandon, you didn't have a right to an attorney for a state habeas, is that right?
That's right.
So you'd be expected to do a pro se petition. And so you can all imagine how many people had sufficient experience and skills to bring about a pro se petition and argue the legal issues effectively. And so you didn't bring anything.
No,
You were
no.
done. So when did you write to the Innocence Project?
Keith identified a legal error in his first trial.
Oh, yes, that's what got it overturned. A word subsequent to, that was important. And my name's in the law book for having it changed over. That was a technicality. See, in the state of Virginia at that time, capital case dealing with murder and rape, it was set up that if a woman was raped, she was murdered. Well, in this case, the husband was murdered, and then the rape occurred. And that's the part subsequent to. And I told my appeal attorney, look into this. See what this is all about. This is something that even I can understand. I know nothing about the law other than they can have their way with you. You don't get a cigarette afterwards.
So when did you write to the Innocence Project?
I think that was 2014. As I explained to the law student, at this point in my life, a lot of dates and times and names and stuff I don't keep up with because I'm too busy going out having fun and things like that. And if I spend all my time trying to remember dates and times and stuff, my lovely girlfriend, Mary, she's here to help me. She writes all these things down and says, oh, you got an appointment tomorrow? Okay, thank you. I'll get off the mini bike and go to the appointment.
So Keith, you mentioned that your parents died, but you had a number of brothers.
Right.
Did they come visit you while you were in prison?
Once. My parents, when I was close by, visited a couple times, and I got moved all around the state of Virginia. That's the way the system's set up. It's a level thing, and in custody, the longer you stay, the less infractions you get into, they send you to a lower security type prison. And I fell in there with a first degree murder, or originally with capital murder case. So they put me in with the death row people. I wasn't with them, but I was at the same institution where they kept death row and that type of thing. So I moved around a lot, and I told, don't come up here. There's no need to visit me. I'm the one that's here, not you. You don't need to suffer, and especially visitation. If any of y'all's ever visited anybody in prison, you'll know what I'm talking about. It's an embarrassing situation. I wouldn't want anybody to go through it. I mean, it's just, but that's what they have to do to keep stuff from happening.
So basically, for those 33 years, your parents visited you before they died?
Right, yes, sir.
But how long after you were convicted was it when they passed away?
That was in 95, about 10 years, 10, 11, 12 years. My mother passed away first, and then my father, he died of a broken heart, and that's what it was. He died shortly after.
So after they died and they were no longer visiting you, did any family or anybody come visit you, or were you on your own after that?
I was pretty much on my own. I had pen pals, but that was it. I had no visits.
There came a time when the DNA results came in.
Right.
You were told, I guess, by Chris or others that you're getting out, right?
Right.
And they all came to the prison to see you that day and walk you out, right?
Correct, yes.
And I think there came a time you were all sitting together in a room waiting to leave. At that point in time, who came through the door? Your brothers?
Yeah, two of my brothers and a sister-in-law came up there to pick me up.
And you hadn't seen them in how many years?
Well, Larry, one of my other brothers, I had seen since probably the early 80s.
So what was that like to all of a sudden
well,
see them? Have you not seen them?
Well, you just have to realize, I was so overwhelmed with the whole situation because of the fact, it's, y'all are telling me you're going to get out, and we're thinking like this is March. We're looking like maybe Christmas. A month later, historically in the state of Virginia, for me, after all this stuff came about, they decided, well, we need to get this guy out of here because he's not good news for us. A month later, I'm standing out in the parking lot, but on a Thursday, when I was exonerated by the Supreme Court of Virginia, I didn't even know about it. The guys back in the pod and stuff knew about it. They saw it on the news. I was sitting in medical because they were gonna lock me up in medical, and I didn't know why. I was over arguing with them. No, you're not gonna put me back here. I spent 5 months back here in medical, and that's the Walking Dead back there. I said, there's no need for me to be here. And a lieutenant, she came up, calmed me down, said, you'll find out. A few minutes later, I'm up in the warden's office, which is where you don't go if you're an inmate. You don't go up past the line. They walked me right past the line. I'm sitting up there thinking, okay, something's going on here. I have no clue what's going on. And the warden walked in. He said, Mr. Harward. He shook my hand, which, staff, you don't touch, that kind of stuff. He said, you're a free man, and I can't let you back into prison because you're a security risk for me. If you go back in there, somebody might be mad at you for getting out and want to kill you or something. I said, no, sir. Those people aren't going to do that, and they would.
So what did it feel like when you walked out?
Finally out of the prison.
Yeah.
Once again, it was a blur. I walked out in the parking lot, and there's 30-some journalists in the parking lot, plus Chris and Dana and Matt, and a bunch of them are there. People have to understand that a third of a century in prison is not the route you take for public speaking. So I stayed up all that night in medical. I did not sleep because I'm thinking, I got to go out here and do a press conference. I've never done that. What am I going to do? And how am I not going to embarrass people, especially myself? But I got through it, so. But it was kind of overwhelming. It really was. But once again, it just, it was a blur. It was like, I don't know. It's hard to explain. It's one of those things. It might be like right before a car accident. What people say, everything slows down and it's in slow motion. It's still like that. It's still like that for me.
Good. You mentioned before that you couldn't qualify for Social Security. Just so everybody here is aware of it, if you had finished your Navy term and started that business in mechanics,
right,
you would have been paying into Social Security.
Correct.
And now at 65, you would be able to get the benefits.
Right.
But because all those quarters of paying in you spent in prison,
right,
they don't count towards Social Security.
Correct. Which I do now. I do get Social Security. I took it at 62, but it's like $400 a month, something like that. And if I'd done it the whole time, it would have been different.
How are you getting Social Security? Because they're counting your time as having been in the Navy?
That and apparently the time before. But there's a big blank in there.
Okay.
That if I'd put anything in, I would have got a little bit out. But because I got out when I was 60. Wasn't nobody going to hire me. I didn't want to work. I've already worked for 33 years as a convict. I figured that owed me something, but of course the state of Virginia or whatever didn't want to pay me anything, even though they eventually did. You get no point. You don't get any points for that.
Did any of the prosecutors from that office apologize, or
No.
anybody from the police department apologize?
No.
How about any of the 6 dentists? Have they apologized?
No. One of them still thinks he got the guy, and that's Levine. Somebody else did the raping. I just did the biting. Because we weren't told that when we were down in New Orleans by his colleagues. There's ego involved with some of these expert witnesses. That's what, per diem, get to travel around the country, get in front of trials and eat nice food and stuff. It's all crap.
So the good people here may have a few questions. I'm going to ask you one last question.
Yes, sir.
What are your immediate plans for the future?
Whatever I want to do within but anyway, I want to travel and do that type thing. I've kind of, the state of Virginia gave me a compensation thing. I have a little annuity, so I have a little bit of money coming in every month. I bought a house in the beautiful town of Elizabethtown, North Carolina. No, not Elizabeth City, Elizabethtown. If you ever heard of White Lake, it's down below Fayetteville. It's a little resort type area, but I have a little 3-bedroom, 2-bath house, 3/4 of an acre. I have a couple vehicles, and I purchased a nice motorhome. I'm working on that as we speak, or having somebody else work on it. I plan to travel, just go around the country and hopefully to visit other exonerees, go by and see those people and just see the country and do things that I didn't get a chance to do because, you know, it's a beautiful world out here. And now I'm unincarcerated. To say free, I'll never be free of this. This is something I have to live with the rest of my life. Because I get emotional about every little thing, because unlike most people, I see things and witness things that y'all pass right by. You're too busy doing that type of thing, and I see things, and a lot of things just you know, upset me, make me emotional. I'm not mad, but I'm disappointed in a lot of people. It just something that happened last week. I was out in my yard raking leaves, and I love raking leaves because I can. Because I was in prison, that's all I thought about, was being able to do that kind of stuff. And I'm out beside my house, and I see a city police car come by, driving real slow with the lights on. I'm thinking, what is going on here? And I started thinking, well, something's happening in the neighborhood. And then here comes a sheriff's car, same thing. And then there's the hearse. And I'm thinking, that poor soul's going to his resting place. And I thought, oh my God, that was me every day. I was in that hearse waiting to die. But it's all good.
It is.
Everything's good.
It is all good. Folks, any questions you'd like to ask Keith?
Yes,
You want to
ma'am.
handle? Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry.
You're a professor.
First of all, I hope you live another 60 years to do whatever you want to do. And second of all, I'd like to invite you to come and visit Iowa. It's a beautiful place.
Well, I may get that way. I'm thinking of going this way and then around and down the middle. There's so much stuff out there to do in this country. So much, you know, Charles Corral. I want to be Charles Corral. Some of y'all don't know who he is, but, you know, he could pull up in a town, his little Winnebago, and he could find the story. And that's one thing I do now. I ask people before I tell them my story, because before any of y'all saw me, I could be standing behind you in the food line, and I would tell Mary or to myself, that person does not know who I am. And I think you know, you need to hear my story, but let me find out where you from, what you about, what you want to be. And I want to go out and do that. I mean, just to sit down with people, because the age of technology, I sit in airports with my little battery-powered radio, my little earbuds, and watch people wait for planes, and all they're doing is, they're not saying, hey, how you doing? Where you going today? And to hear the story, it's so fabulous to talk to people. And then I tell them my story, and they're like, oh my God, I feel sorry. Well, it's not your fault. It was those criminals in Newport News. And the second thing they always say, did them SOBs do anything for you financially? And I tell them that. But my story's no different than anybody's in here, you know, or better or worse. It's just a story.
Other questions?
So I'm wondering whether when you were in prison, you ran into other prisoners that you thought were also innocent.
Well, everybody in prison is innocent. And the Innocence Project can tell you that, because they get people, all guys and girls all the time, trying to find some way to circumvent the law system to be able to get out. But there are a lot of people in prison that don't deserve to be there for the length of time they are, or the circumstances that they were convicted under. You got to understand, you go to prison, you lose everything. You lose everything. Your family can die, pass away. They don't want anything to do with you because you're a criminal. The public don't want anything to do with you because you're a criminal. I'm a convict. I didn't commit a crime, but I am a convict. And some people see me that way, and I understand, because I was living with those people. But there are some good people in prison that need help in either sentencing and that type of thing, or with wrongful conviction, in the fact that maybe they were convicted of something they didn't do that was associated with something they did do. When I was in jail, I saw a young kid that ended up with 12 breaking and entering charges because the police were his friend and would give him sodas and cigarettes. Oh, we got these old cases. It's not going to mean anything. If you'd help us sign these things off, we get those things out of the way, and we'll talk to the judge. Well, that never happened. And the poor kid got convicted of 12 breaking and enterings. He broke into a drive-in, one place, but they had him, coerced him into accepting 11 more cases. But go ahead.
No, just more questions, but I'd like the students got to have some questions. No? Students, back there, yeah.
Sorry, my voice, but so you asked a question at the beginning, what are the odds that 6 forensic dentists would all come to the same erroneous conclusion innocently? Well, that just
Independently.
Independently, right? But that just sounds like a full indictment of the methods of forensic dentistry. So I was hoping that you could actually just talk a little bit about some of the flaws in that aspect of forensic science and maybe what we've learned about things like bite mark analysis since the time of your case.
You want Keith to talk about that?
Well, probably better you. You know more about law than I do.
Well, better than me, but try and keep it as brief as you can. Chris, you want to respond?
There you go.
Oh, it's such
My man.
garbage, it's bite mark analysis represents everything that's wrong in forensic science today in our country. It's the junkiest of all of the forensic techniques that are still admissible today. I think what's important, just in terms of as we relate to kind of the broader issues that we're talking about in the conference today, is that the same lack of statistical database or statistical significance that was required to make any kind of conclusions is missing from almost all pattern and impression evidence. So, Mr. Harward's case, I think, represents kind of the purest manifestation of the harms associated with unreliable and unvalidated science being used. The particular technique in his case, bite mark analysis, has been discredited everywhere on the globe outside of criminal courts where it's still admissible in all 50 states.
It's maybe also worth noting, we were just talking about lab reports. There was a technique used in the case, but nothing was introduced at trial, which was blood typing, serology. There's nothing wrong with the technique used, but the analyst changed the conclusion in the report so that it wouldn't reflect that Mr. Harwood was excluded. And that didn't come out until years and
33 years later.
Right. And so there's been an investigation of, I guess, I don't think we've heard the results yet. I think it'll be announced in another month or two. There's been an investigation within that lab. What other cases did this person work on if he was willing to alter the result to conform with what the prosecutors presumably wanted?
Other questions? Didn't you have one, ma'am?
I had a question about what point did you start feeling hopeful that you might?
I didn't, because of what happened.
Right.
With these great people representing me, and also Skaggs and Arps as a law firm that also represented me along with the Innocence Project, they were much more excited than I was. I still, every day I get up, and that's why I'm the luckiest person in the 3-foot circle. I get up every day realizing this, when most people don't have that opportunity because they get up in the morning, they got to take care of the kids or get to class or whatever. And I get up every day and think, I got it made. I've got it made now. I didn't then, but I'm so lucky. But that's part of me, and it frustrates my girlfriend and my family. Things that you can tell me something, but until I witness it myself, I can't. Well, this is how you do it. Whatever, I have to do it myself to realize it, and it's not against you. It's just I don't have that trust. I have to witness it by myself and be aware of what it is. And when we were going through this, they called me up and said, well, okay, you've been excluded as the perpetrator through the DNA. And they said, well, you need to, I said, no, y'all need to calm down. I'm good. I'm here. Y'all need to go and do what you're supposed to do, cross the T's, dot the I's, get it all right. And even when I got out, I wasn't really excited. That was I guess, taken away from me, that exuberance. Oh, I love every day and I have as much fun as I can legally, but, it's still to this day, that's one of the things that, you know, I try to do everything I can that's right, because even if you do everything that's right, somebody might say, no, you're wrong, and I don't want to be that person. And it's still tough. It's getting easier for me, but it's still tough. I just don't trust a lot of stuff. And I can't get real excited because that quick. Anybody.
I would recommend looking up the appellate decision in Keith's case, because the reason that we were excited is that when we came across the appellate decision, you can read it, and he sounds innocent in the case that's affirming his conviction. You just say, Jesus Christ, this was enough for a capital conviction. It was unbelievable, and you could see in the opinion that there would be DNA all over the scene. You know, what I mean, it was. We felt, and I'm not like Olga Axelrod, who's the real experienced DNA exonerator, and Dana were doing the heavy lifting on this, and I was looking for bite mark cases like Keith's, and it was just immediately apparent. They were the ones that had all the experience. Were telling Keith to be calm. I was super excited. I was like, that was me. I was like, he's out, man. We're getting him out, right? I was like,
Keith, do you have just any closing remark to the assembled multitude here? Like to say?
Be careful. Look both ways, that kind of stuff. But just know, just be aware, if you see something on television, a crime occurs. 2 days later, the police are talking about it, the investigators, well, you know, we suspect this person, that kind of thing. The person's convicted, and you figure he's gone away. Don't take it 100%. Always question, well, what if? Because as you found out, there's a lot of what ifs in my case. That one would have been enough to throw up red flags, but they went on about their job of convicting me. And just be aware that that's a possibility. Regardless how heinous the crime or how simple the crime is, there may be something going on, because it's still going on today in you know, trials and courtrooms. Prosecutors, to be prosecutors, what do they have to do? Prosecute. If you don't prosecute, you're not a prosecutor. So if I got to hedge my bets a little bit, I'm going to do it and hope I don't get caught. You know, and just be aware that, you know, that there's stuff going on. And these people, the Innocence Project and others that are around, support them. Volunteer, call them up, see what you can do. You know, send them a few dollars, whatever you can do to help out. Because the state's not going to pay any money. They're going to use their money to fight them. They get no pay. All their income is from donations and that sort of thing. And I've been to some of these people's houses. I've walked by his, but I've been at these lawyers' offices, houses and stuff, and they ain't driving Mercedes Benz, and they're not living at the Washington Duke Hotel. I'm telling you.
Thanks.
So it's all about the good heart.